Welcome back. In our commercial break, the president tweeted his information of a new acting chief of staff. And Jeff Bennett, that new acting chief of staff, this is your beat.
Mick Mulvaney. Apparently the president tweeted in the last, 5 minutes or so that he says, I'm pleased to announce that Mick Mulvaney, director of the Office of Management and Budget, will be named acting White House chief of staff, replacing General John Kelly, as we know, is leaving at the end of the month. And then he says, Mick has done an outstanding job while in the administration. Now, this is somebody who already wears a number of hats in the administration. He's the director of Office Management and Budget. Before that, he was a congressman. So this is somebody who potentially could help Donald Trump see around the corners here as the House Democrats take control in January and send a deluge of subpoenas and oversight demands to the West Wing.
Obviously, the word acting is the buzzword there, and who knows who demanded the acting? We don't have any reports.
And remember, Nick Ayers was supposed to be the acting chief of staff, but that blew up over a conversation about the timeline. Nick Ayers didn't want to serve more than a few months in that position. He wanted to go back home to Georgia, and the president wanted a 2-year commitment. So all day we've seen, or all week, frankly, we've seen people take their names off the list of consideration. Mark Meadows, Chris Christie, and so now Mick Mulvaney appears to be the last man standing in this acting
so
capacity.
He's currently budget director, a Senate-confirmed position. He was the acting head of the
Consumer Protection
Financial Board, right? But they have a new head of that. So I guess he was down to one job for a while.
Yeah, he was like, I need more things to do.
All right, Matthew Continetti, obviously the president's using the word acting. We knew before that acting was the definition of 3 months. I would argue what chief of staff isn't acting, meaning like you serve at the pleasure of one person and one person only. But obviously something tells me that word mattered to one or both of them.
Yeah, absolutely, and maybe Mulvaney was reluctant to hold the job on for more than.
But he's supposedly been wanting to seek it for years.
We just don't know. We can only speculate. We do know that he has quite a job ahead of him.
Yes.
And General Kelly was successful when he came in the late summer of 2017.
Was it 1 week or 2 weeks that he had success,
and then
Charlottesville,
maybe a month,
and then Charlottesville
right?
happened.
But even after that, maybe a month or so, 2 months, right? There was a period where he had, the flow of information to the president, traditional chief of staff job. Not being able to manage who comes into the Oval Office and who does
Rob Porter.
And then, of course,
the whole thing seemed to collapse.
In the spring, that collapsed with Porter. So you have to ask, is Mick Mulvaney, is he going to try to reassert the authority of the chief of staff like General Kelly had done with Mick's success? Or is he just going to be basically a facilitator and an advisor to the president?
You know what's been interesting, Daniela, is that Mick Mulvaney, in the first 6 months of the administration, was aggressively a public face of the administration, and then suddenly he wasn't. And I didn't understand. I don't know if he made any mistakes. I thought he was actually a pretty good surrogate for this White House compared to other folks that they had put out.
Yeah, I mean, the bar, again, is very low with this administration, but in terms of people who just have sort of a basic level of competency, I may not agree with any of his policies or positions. You can say Mick Mulvaney had that. And he's been there. He's right up front. He can see what's happening in that Oval Office. And so maybe he's the one who demanded the acting, because who wants that job? Well,
Chris Christie takes himself out. Nick Ayers, clearly, I'm not even going to take it in. By the way, I'm leaving for Georgia today. I can understand why this is not an appealing job right now. He's already been through 2. Do we have that picture? I think we were going to do this later in the show, but to control the picture that Reince Priebus tweeted, we were going to tease it like, okay, 1 year from now, who will be the third person in the photo? It was from the White House Christmas party, John Kelly and Reince Priebus here. But this is a pretty thankless job.
It is, as one source put it to us, history has already predetermined the next guy's fate. And this was what a source told us as we were trying to figure out who was in the running to be chief of staff. But clearly anybody, and this used to be the pinnacle of one's career, for Washington politicos, but anybody who has watched the sort of unceremonious departures of John Kelly and Reince Priebus, you see how Donald Trump undercuts these people who he hires, but then when they sort of emerge as an obstacle to him or a rival to his primacy, then all of a sudden they're expendable. So again, perhaps that has something to do with why Mick Mulvaney agreed to do this in an acting capacity. We just don't know yet. But again, there are a number of reasons why anybody gunning for a position like this would have to.
It's possible he could be acting through 2020. I mean, this is not
certainly through until January 2020 or so. I mean, even in a typical presidency, the chief of staff's year and a half, I think, is about the average tenure. So this is just accelerated with the atypical presidency of Donald Trump.
Look, I think that the downside of Mick Mulvaney, I mean, it's funny. Daniela, on paper, John Kelly never made sense as a chief of staff, particularly as you gear up for an election. Okay, he's never been in an election campaign. He had some interactions with Congress when he was a military liaison, but let's be realistic, not really the political chops. Mulvaney is actually not somebody that has been involved in national campaigns. You know, he was a congressman from an area that was easy to win, right? So that he might not be. So that may be another reason why he's just an acting, that he's not the partner that you need in a re-election year.
Right. I think maybe they're just stalling for time to find, that
if
person.
anybody else will take it.
Yeah, who will actually say, I'm not going to, I'll put all that other stuff aside, everything that I've seen that's happened over the past couple of months, and I will come in here into this thankless job. And you're right. You think about John Kelly and Reince Priebus, they walked into the White House with pretty good reputations. Again, I don't agree with any of their policies, but they had good standing, and he just undercut them, and they walk out like it's bad.
For what it's worth, I believe this is the fourth budget director, at least since I've been covering presidents, that has moved from the budget director to the chief of staff. Leanne Panetta was OMB to chief of staff. Josh Bolton went from OMB to chief of staff for George W. Bush. I think Jack Lew was budget director and then ended up as chief of staff. So there is a reason budget directors get picked. Other than chief of staff, you touch every part of the federal government. So Mick Mulvaney has a familiarity with every aspect of the federal government. So as for being the conductor, he's perfectly he's got the perfect job to learn.
Right, and it's also true that the short list wasn't all that long. So White House officials we talked to really waved us off the notion that Jared Kushner was ever a serious contender.
Bossie seemed to be the front runner like an hour ago. For what it's worth.
But again, inside the West Wing, he was seen as a polarizing figure, and that he never really won over Jared and Ivanka, who you need to win over in order to be chief of staff, we're told.
Well, now we know why Chris Christie didn't get the job.
There's one chief of staff, there's one director of communications, there's one political director in this White House, and they are all named Donald J. Trump.
Yep.
Yeah, pure and simple.
That's it.
He is better off. This might be what it's an acting chief of staff, but you know what? His office will be in the Eisenhower building where OMB is. Anyway. All right, guys, we're going to. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.